مساء الخير والسلام عليكم، وأهلا بكم في الندوة الثانية من ندوات تكريم. العنوان العريض لهذه الندوة هو العالم العربي بين اليوم والغد، وكما هو ملاحظ هو عنوان عريض ومطاط وكبير وقابل لكي نخوض فيه من جهات عديدة وزوايا مختلفة. قبل أن أبدأ بالتعريف بالبانelists أحب أن أتحدث عن شيء بسيط جدا، وهو لا يمكن الحديث في أي حال من الأحوال أن تتحدث عن اليوم أو تستشرف المستقبل إذا لا تتحدث عن الماضي. ينبغي أن نضع الماضي دائما في حسباننا لكي نعرف كيف وصلنا إلى هذه النقطة. المؤرخون يؤرخون العصر العربي الحالي بداية من حملة نابليون. عندما جاء نابليون إلى مصر كان هذا هو الارتطام الكبير الذي حصل بين الغرب والشرق، ومنذ ذلك الحين والعالم العربي بشكل خاص والعالم الإسلامي بشكل عام هو في صراع ما بين الغرب وما بين الشرق، في محاولة لاستكشاف طريق جديد. وأعتقد، وهذا ما يقوله العلماء الاجتماع، ما زلنا لحد هذه اللحظة نبحث عن هذا الطريق. لقد لاحظنا خلال السنوات 100 الماضية ظهور حركات كثيرة وظهور أفكار جديدة تقدم العالم العربي للأمام في فترة من الفترات، كما حصل في العشرينات والثلاثينات والأربعينات والخمسينات والستينات، ثم بدأنا نرجع إلى الخلف. نضع 3 أفكار بحسباننا عندما نتحدث عن مجتمع يتقدم إلى الأمام. 3 عناصر أساسية هي التي تقدم المجتمع إلى الأمام. أولاً، وهذا الأمر لا يخطر في بال كثير من الناس، هو التكنولوجيا. لو نظرنا إلى العالم خلال 200 عام الماضية ترى أن التكنولوجيا كانت الدافع الأول والأساسي في تقدم الشعوب. النقطة الثانية هي القوانين. انظر إلى أي مجتمع متقدم سواء كان في الشرق أو في الغرب تجد أن العنصر الأساسي الذي يرتكز عليه هذا التقدم هو القانون. والنقطة الثالثة هي الأفكار الجديدة. عندما تجتمع هذه العناصر ال3 سوف تستطيع أن تقول أنه وضعت مجتمع ما على سكة التقدم. الآن نسأل من واحد أخت سارة أبو شعر تقدم نفسها، ثم ننتقل إلى البانelists الآخرين.
Thank you very much for the very kind introduction. سامحوني راح أحكي بالإنجليزي بس I can express myself better that way. So I'm Sarah Abu Sha'ar. I was born to a Syrian father and a Palestinian mother, and so both countries that are very much torn by conflict. And so from a very young age, I was very passionate to try to effect change. When I got to my university, Harvard, I had the opportunity to give the Harvard commencement address on my graduation day. At the time, the Arab world was very much kind of still activated by the Arab Spring. And that really influenced the message of my speech. I called on the graduates that day, there were 6,000 of them, to take the knowledge that we had been really enriched with and to serve as 6,000 revolutions of change in our societies. But revolutions not in arms, as we see, in the vast majority of the region, but in minds. And the speech ended up, I was the first Arab to take that stage in the university's history, and the speech was the most watched address in its history. But more importantly for me, I got to see and to hear from young people across the region who had expressed to me شغف وطموح. And so I really saw that Arab youth are not any different from youth around the world when we empower them with opportunity, but they need to be given a path. They wrote telling me, we never thought that we could even apply, we never thought that we could even aspire, but now seeing an Arab up there, now I want to try. And so I've made it my life's goal to work on empowering youth. I did this while I was working at the White House. I did this while I was working at Goldman Sachs. I was very much involved in going into schools in the Middle East and working with young people on really broadening the horizon of what they perceive as their opportunity. And it's a commitment that I will continue to dedicate myself to.
Thank you very much. Next.
Thank you so much for the invitation. My name is Khayyat. I'm an architect and designer. Unfortunately, I'm born in Jordan, originally from Palestine, a British citizen, And we always have this conflict of identity, like how to identify ourselves. And it's unfortunate that I prefer to speak in English, which is like Arabic is a very beautiful language. But I think this takes us back to the conflict we live in the Arabic world and the conflicts we have now between the past and the future. And I think going back to all the points that Sarah mentioned now, that we have so much potentials in the Arab world, but I think because of all that's going around us and because of all the conflicts we have, not only war conflicts, but mental conflicts and identity conflicts, and like the concept of who we are within this big world. I think that's the first challenge I think we live in. I don't think our problem is the wars that's happening in the Middle East. I think our biggest problem is the wars that's happening between us on the intellectual level and on the level of exchanging ideas and thoughts to bring us forward. We don't need to forget that we were the leaders in the past in terms of all the kind of fields, and now we are in the back seats watching everybody progressing, unfortunately. So I think, yeah, maybe that's the starting point of that discussion about this identity conflict, and that I've realized when you asked us, or you told us we could speak in English. So,
excellent point. I'm sure we will get back to it. Next is Dalaa.
اسمي دلع المفتي، هو اسمي مو لقب. أنا كاتبة وصحفية. في لقاء من اللقاءات مذيعة سمتني الكاتبة المثيرة للجدل، وأعجبني هذا الاسم، هذا اللقب. أنا صوتي عالي، وحاد عندما أكتب، فهذا يزعج الكثير من الناس، فأتعرض للكثير من النقد والهجوم، لكن مستمرة وبقوة ولا أقبل أن يسكتني أحد. عندي 4 إصدارات كتب، الأخير منع في الكويت لأنني مثيرة للجدل، بينما وزع في كل دول العربية ما عدا في بلدي في الكويت. أكتب في صحيفة القبس الكويتية، عمود أسبوعي يوم الخميس، أتطرق فيه لكافة الجوانب السلبية والإيجابية في وطننا العربي ككل وفي الكويت خاصة. هذا كل ما هنالك.
أستاذ صعب.
أنا اسمي غسان صعب، من مواليد لبنان. بلش بالعربي لأن مش عم بتمرن على العربي، صار لي 50 سنة بأمريكا. خريج الجامعة الأمريكية، وين منى؟ سبقتها بالهندسة المعمارية بشي 20 سنة يمكن، وهجرت على أمريكا ودخلت في مجال المقاولات والأعمال العقارية. بس ما نسيت إنه الأمور الاجتماعية والأمور الخيرية لها دور كبير، والإنسان لازم يحسن مجتمعه وين ما كان. الأشياء اللي بتهمني كتير هي العلم، أهم شيء. طبعاً في كل الباقي الأمور الإنسانية مهمة، وأنا بشاركك 2 من ال3 اللي تفضلت فيهم لتقدم المدن المجتمعات، التكنولوجيا، ولكن الأفكار مع التكنولوجيا. يعني من ال3 أنا بعملهم 2. القانون كمان مهم جداً.
خليني بس أوضح هذه النقطة، لأنه راح ممكن تكون مستقبل، يعني ضمن الحلقة من الأساسيات. بالأفكار الجديدة ما كنت أقصد أنه واحد يطلع بفكرة جديدة، وإنما بين فترة وأخرى هناك في تاريخ الحضارات تطلع فكرة جديدة، مثل فكرة الديمقراطية عندما نشأت في أثينا، كانت فكرة جديدة ثورية لم تخطر في بال. فكرة البروبورشنال ريبريزنتيشن فكرة جديدة، فكرة الدايركت ريبريزنتيشن، فكرة فصل السلطات عن بعضها، فكرة فصل الدين عن الدولة. هذه أفكار بين فترة وفترة تظهر وتكون صادمة، والمجتمع لا يتقبلها، ونحن في خضم هذه الصدمة التي أصيب فيها العالم العربي، وهو أنه الجانب الإكزيكتيف التنفيذي يكون خاضع للسلطة التشريعية. لذلك الدول ال5 وال6 وال10 مستقبلا ترفض هذا الأمر. ينبغي أن يكون هناك قائد واحد يفعل ما يريد، هو يعرف ما يحتاج للشعب. هذه الأفكار الجديدة عندما نستطيع ونتمكن من تبنيها يطلع المجتمع لقدام. كمل لو سمحت.
فصل الدين عن الدولة من أهم الشروط للتقدم اللي الدولة العربية بتطلع لها، و أنا look forward to our discussions.
صباح الخير، أنا سوريا مصرية فنلندية. كنت متخيلة إن أنا أقصى طموحي إن أنا أبقى CEO. كنت أنا مديرة موارد بشرية في شركة كبيرة قوي مصرية بعد الثورة على طول. لما في يوم جات لي فكرة إنه أنا ما ينفعش أسكت على اللي بيحصل في ميدان التحرير من تحرشات واعتداءات جنسية، كانت الفتيات والسيدات بيروحوا المستشفى بعدها يقعدوا فيها بالأسبوع. فقررت في يوم كده وانا في الشغل ان انا هبتدي حاجه اسمها تحرير بودي جارد، وهجيب على حسابي يونيفورمات، وهجيب 200 راجل و300 راجل، وهنضرب المتحرشين وهننقذ الستات. واللي حصل ان التجربه دي غيرت حياتي تماما. فما بقتش اقصى طموحي ان انا ابقى CEO، بقى اقصى طموحي ان انا اكمل واعمل فرق، لان مفيش احساس اجمل من انك تبقى عملت حاجه تساعد حد تاني. فابتديت اشتغل في كل انواع العنف ضد المراه، من ختان، وبرضو اشتغل على تعزيز مكانة المرأة في مصر. ده دخلني الى مجال التعليم، ومجال تاني اللي هو الحفاظ على التراث، لان احنا في مصر عندنا مشكلة ان خلاص احنا ما بقاش عندنا يهود. كان عندنا 80,000 يهودي مصري، دلوقتي بقى عندنا 6 في القاهرة، والمعابد خلاص هتتقفل. فأنا حبيت إن أنا أشارك وأشتغل على الحفاظ على التراث اليهودي المصري علشان أحافظ على هوية مصر المحتضنة لل3 أديان. شكرا.
I don't know why I'm on this panel. Thank you very much, Ricardo, for getting me here, because I'm the only layman with you guys here. But coming to your question, let me just bring it from a different perspective. Along with Ghassan, we are from the old generation. I am a mixed up person. Mughtarib. I've spent more than 37 years of my life outside my own country. It's a small little country called Bahrain. But I see all the mixed up things in Bahrain whenever I visit Bahrain and visit other countries in the Middle East. I would say all what's been said, especially the inspiring talk from you at the beginning, all of that is not going to happen without fixing few things. We always going from the 3rd floor, we want to go to the penthouse, but we don't want to go down there. We don't want to fix that. Everybody has a reason why we don't want to fix that. And we don't want to fix that because I would say actually it is not calling it double standards, I will call it actually double traditions. We always have the interest side of things, and we have the value side of things. And we are always good in values whenever it suits our interest, okay? But we always walk over values when it does not suit our interest. So it's very much, we're in cross-border on those 2 things. And I think the young, with all the problems that we have today, I just bring you back to the UNDP report of 2002, which is very famously, everybody remembers. Thank you very much, Condoleezza Rice and everybody else for getting that done and choosing the people who did it. But actually, when you look at that report, including the gender gap and everything else, and look at the UNDP report of 2016, nothing has changed. We're still in the same, like, في مكانك سر. We're standing where we were there. Matter of fact, I would say we are the only part of the world. We are standing where we were in 1980. Everybody since 1980 has been going forward, whether it is Asia, whether it is Africa, whether it is Southern America, who were all similar to us. They are there, including actually Sub-Saharan Africa, which are moving very fast, but we are still standing still where we were, with a lot of issues, which basically comes back to the value factor. But I liked what was said last night by the Chief Executive of Imbis. And he said it in a very shy way. And later on when I saw him at dinner, I asked him, he said, my wife actually cut a lot of that off, what I wanted to say. Because entrepreneurship, which is a very important thing for the young to push, and creating jobs, which is what's done in the real world, في العالم, the real world that we talk about, there are few things which are important there. One is critical thinking. Critical thinking is the most important thing. Education without true critical thinking is a waste of time. Going to Harvard, going wherever you're going to go to, but if you're not allowed to come back in your own country to use critical thinking as a base of education and to take forward, entrepreneurship is not going to flourish. The entrepreneurship that we have, we see what's happening for Saudi. Every billionaire for Saudi is not an entrepreneur. And they're not entrepreneurs. A lot of them, from what we see, has come actually from relationships and that's the way the money has been made.
Ustad Khaled Janahi, keep that thought with you for just a minute, because I'm going to expand it just a
Yeah,
little bit.
but I want to go to the next one.
I
because
will come back to you, I promise.
It's not just the issue, it is the rule of the law. The rule of the law is the most important factor. And I would actually urge them, as we are sitting here, and now we're not going to go forward as long as there is somebody above the law. Whether you like it or not in the Arab world, min al-Mashriq al-Maghrib, there is always somebody above the law. And that, unfortunately, here is where the issue is. And he told me, go all the way. I will go all the way. أجزم شيئا آخر today. We don't have a single ruler and single leader in the Arab world. We have rulers, we don't have leaders. Not only at the political side, even in the schools, even at home, even in business. So we are countries of rulers with no leaders. Okay. And as long as we have that, we're not going to go forward.
Okay. Mr. Janahi put his finger on something very important. Why? Why we in the Arab world are at the back of the herd? Why, when countries start on equal footing in their development march, for instance, let's just make an example between Japan and Egypt. When Muhammad Ali came to power back in 1805 or 1804, he started his renaissance at the same time as Japan. 100 years later, Japan in 1905 destroyed the entire Prussian navy in a march of excellence and science that is, to this day, is being studied worldwide. أرجع إلى سارة. In your Harvard Spring, and you put the Arab Springs, did we think at the time that this time we're going to get it right? Because if you pull now, most of the Arab countries, especially the masses, I'm not talking about the 1%, the 2% who speak French and they went to Harvard or the Sorbonne or Oxford. You know, most of the people say, we wish 2011 never came, because at minimum there was security, there was economic development just a little bit. Now we don't know where we are going. Right now, it's a minefield. The question is it better to walk through this minefield in the hope that one day is going to be better, or are we going to retract back again?
That's a great question. And I think, I mean, largely when you look across the region, people are, it's almost like a sense of nostalgia. People want to go back to bad events because we started to prefer the bad for fear of what's worse. And I don't blame them for that when you look at the destruction that you've seen in Syria, in Lebanon, and in Iraq, across the region, really. But I do think that important seeds were planted at the time that really can't be taken back now, which is you do sense that across governments there's a greater accountability of governments toward their people. Yes, our governments continue to be largely autocratic, and as you mentioned, I mean, we have autocrats, not really visionary leaders who take into account people. But I think now more than ever, governments do realize that even as they are not democratic, they do have an accountability to their populace. As it relates to the spring that I brought up in my speech, I wasn't so much speaking to the type of spring that you see today, which we call a winter of weapons and violence. I was speaking to the better parts of the spring that I hope will persist in this younger generation that we're seeing come to the forefront. But for that to be the case, the focus of our government should really be on educating our young people, to really build a new generation of young leaders that will work together to really revolutionize what the type of politics you see around us is.
Although the writing on the wall is not encouraging.
The writing on the wall is not encouraging, but I think as people like ourselves, we have an important role to play by working with schools. Even if we can't work with public systems, perhaps we can help push the private school systems. I think one of the most transformative things for me in my life was I had the opportunity to grow up in Kuwait. I went to a school there that really fostered this critical thinking that you mentioned, fostered the ability to compete on a global level. We don't have that en masse across the region, but to the extent that we can really, through our philanthropic efforts, through our, let's say, corporations, subsidize that type of education to make it accessible to a broader, mass, we start to affect small change that I think in the long term, you shift the culture today in schools, and that culture is not insignificant. We treat culture like it's a side concept, but the culture of today is the cement of the institutions of tomorrow.
The reason why I said it's very important to study history, because history has ample lessons Khaled Janahi mentioned about critical thinking. At the dawn of the Arab Islamic civilization, we had a movement called Al-Mu'tazila. Al-Mu'tazila's basic core was critical thinking, regardless of what it is. Even if it comes to the Quran, they said, if critical thinking, if my mind tells me that this one should be interpreted this way and not an Tariq al-Manqul, that's how we should adopt it. Now, critical thinking in the Arab world is selective, isn't it, Khaled?
Well, the answer is very simple. Of course it is selective, and brings me back to the issue of rulers rather than leaders, and because rulers will never allow true critical thinkers to come through. But actually that brings me back to revolution, or shall I say evolution, not revolution. That was the response to 2011, what happened. And I remember, I'm getting old actually, I'm worse than you when it comes to dementia. I remember it was King Abdullah II in the Dead Sea, October 2011, when it was the World Economic Forum meeting. And when he stood up and he said, we want evolution, not revolution. And evolution, by definition, is going to happen, basically, it's not going to happen immediately, it's going to take its time. But that was 2011. Today, we are in 2017. And I'll tell you one thing, we are much worse off today than we were in 2011. So what's happening is that there is lack of push in terms of really going forward. And because it is, and basically it's because of what is being selective, not just critical thinking, allowing people to go forward is very, very selective. What's happening today? Today we are all confused with what's going on in Lebanon, with Saad al-Hariri, what's happening Muhammad with MBS, MBZ, you name it. Everything what's going around is confusing the hell out of everybody. The purge. Suddenly everybody's looking into what Thomas Friedman wrote a few days back. I mean, rather than actually being an Arab, I mean, I was going to ask the ladies, the journalists in the session before, where is our coverage of this thing? Why is it Tom Friedman now? Suddenly Jean Blatt and everybody else is responding to Tom Friedman's because he sat with MBS. المشكلة الكبيرة at the end of the day, and Ricardo told me not to say it because he wants to carry on with Takreem, is the love of this thing. We love this seat we sit on. And actually that is in the rulers, in the business, and all the communities, we love this, we don't want to let go. And because we don't want to let go, the cronies, and I'm sorry to say, I call them tabbalas whenever I write, because the number of tabbalas in the Arab world, unfortunately, are substantially much higher the genuine people who want to do something. And that is the creation of the problem. So the people at the top are happy with these cronies around them, the tabbalas. We are very, very big. And a lot of us are tabbalas in one way or the other. So what we're doing is we're not allowing the thing to go forward. So I cannot blame. We always are good in blaming Israel for the problems that we have. Okay, Israel is at fault for a lot of things. They are an occupier. But I should not blame them for the stupidity that I see in front of me every day. I should look at the mirror first. Before I ask you to look at the mirror, I should look at the mirror. There is a lot of fault in us individually. And we blame others rather than blaming ourselves. I think maybe, for the young, that's what I say to the young. Look at the mirror. First of all, be accountable to yourself before you make other people accountable to you. So your faults are before other people's faults. So now that's the only way we're going to go forward. If we don't start from the base, we're never going to go forward.
This culture of fear that Khaled Janahi is talking about, and that is, you know, let's all sing from the same hymn sheet, let's do tatbil for the ruler. It's been going on for a long time. And the first panelists, they talked about the two schools of real journalism and the school of opinion. To what extent do you think, Dalaa, we might one day have certain institutions protected by law, just like the New York Times when they sent Thomas Friedman? He knows very well whatever he asked, whatever questions he asked, and if somebody from the Saudi Diwan, they call the publisher, they said, Thomas Friedman crossed the line, they said, don't worry about it, we will take care of you. Do you think one day we will be there?
هذا حلم صعب بالمنال، يعني حلم كتير بعيد، وإلى أن نصل لهذيك النقطة عنا شغل كتير لنسوي. بدي أرجع لنقطة نحن هل كنا أفضل قبل 2011 وهلأ وضعنا سيء. أعتقد أنه كل الثورات العربية قامت مبدئياً على رغبة حقيقية بالعدل والمساواة والحرية والرغبة في تحقيق أي شيء أفضل.
بس هل كانت واقعية؟
ممكن نقول ساذجة في ظل الدكتاتوريات اللي يعيشها الوطن العربي، لكن كانت رغبة حقيقية من شعب بسيط يريد قليل نزرا من الحرية. لكن وهنا تقع المشكلة، لكن ما أن دخل الإسلام السياسي في الثورات العربية وبدأ يوجه الثوار هنا وهنا وهنا، وبدأت الطائفية والحرب المذهبية تدخل في الثورات، خلص انتهت الثورات العربية، صارت ثورات طائفية وحرب أهلية بين أهل البلد لوحده. وهي النتيجة شايفينها، كل من يقول يا ريتنا ما بدينا ويا ريت اللي جرى ما كان، كنا أحسن.
طارق, Dalaa she's dreaming. She's really dreaming, just like millions of Arabs, intellectual, well thought out, well learned Arabs. And that is, your religion should be in the house. Your religion should be in the mosque. This explosive brew between politics and religion, whenever it was mixed, it ends in big revolution, just like it happened in France. The basic reason for the French Revolution, in addition to poverty, was the clergy. Now, in the Arab world, where they say, الدين هي الدولة والدولة هو الدين, is it ever one day we will see المعممين just sitting in the mosque, they have nothing to do with politics, unlike today where they rule in Iraq and they rule in many other countries?
أنا بتعلم من غسان بحكي شوي أكثر عربي. And going back again, sorry, that 2011, I think our problem is real severe. وإحنا مشكلتنا دائما مش بس بنلوم إسرائيل، حتى we have the culture of blaming our leaders or rulers, whatever you want to call them. إحنا المشكلة إحنا فينا. Yeah?
إحنا الطبالين.
All of us.
كما تكونون يولى عليكم.
بس
إحنا طبالين.
بس
يعني
sorry yeah. disagreement في. أنا قصدي إنه إحنا we have serious problems حتى within our houses. يعني we always, and maybe I'm an architect, so I'm looking from my work. When I want to design something or I want to renovate a house, I look about the plans, I make a research before I, knock down my house and build it again. فإحنا in 2011, we went to the street. It was genuine. It could be genuine. I'm not sure. I don't want to go on the details of that. But we started blaming our leaders and we started to blame the elite who are ruling us. But we didn't understand that actually us, between our discussions, friends sitting in the cafe, families visiting each other, we always have the same arguments and the same things. So I don't think it's just a matter of blaming the rulers or blaming the society or blaming it. It's, I think, internally, all of us, we are still living, we are so much attached to our past.
Is there something wrong with us?
We are so much attached to our past. We have this nostalgic thing. We are very emotional people, Arab world in general. We're very nostalgic. And going back to what Khaled mentioned, that we want to go ahead, but we have serious problems we didn't fix in the past. Until now, going back to Islam Siyasi, we are still arguing about two people who had a dispute 1400 years ago. Yeah? And we fight about that, and we have serious debates about that, which is quite a disaster. It's really a pathetic thing, the level we reached to.
Not to forget that, contrary to what we believe, a great segment of the Arab society are illiterate. I was shocked to hear just in a documentary that 22% of the Egyptians, 22%, almost 17 million people, maybe فكوش الخط, they don't read and write.
Sir, and this is the problem why they use الدين, بيستعمل الدين للتأثير على العقول, إنه صار كل واحد عنده مفتاح الجنة. كل شيخ معمم, whatever you want to call him, he's using this kind of poverty in thinking to make sure that they influence them. And if you follow us, your chair is reserved in heaven. If you don't do that, you end up somewhere else.
Well, let's learn a lesson from our American friend. What is so exceptional about America? I mean, in 1776, when they declared war on the British, 10 years later, they became independent. Within a century, they became the most powerful superpower. What makes them so special? While we in the Arab world, we have so much resources, as we claim, that we could do the same.
There's a document called the American Constitution.
Oh, we have many of those.
We don't even have anything like it that we believe in. In the United States, the American Constitution is above everybody. It's even above Trump, if you can believe it. And our belief and allegiance to the Constitution is what makes the United States an exceptional country. But please allow me, you mentioned the Arab Spring. I believe it is unfair to judge the Arab Spring by its failure.
It's still coming. This is the first
wave.
wave.
I did not say it's still coming. I say even if it has failed, we need to have other attempts at an Arab Springs because we have not been able to effect the gradual change that has been promised by many leaders and rulers of the Arab world. And let's face it, the chair that Khaled mentioned and corruption go hand in hand. The big elephant in the room is always corruption. I think our Arab countries are about as corrupt as any place in the world. And I don't, there may be exceptions, just to cover myself, but now we have an attempt at cleaning corruption in Saudi Arabia. I hope it's a genuine attempt. I hope it succeeds. Nobody knows. Walid Jumblatt joked in Beirut yesterday that if Lebanon attempts the same thing, they're going to need many more Ritz-Carltons than one to put them. So we need to clean corruption. We need the new generation. And our new generation, the younger generation, has a better sense of values than the older generation. We have to give them a chance. And the Arab Spring was one attempt to do that has failed, but we must continue to try.
Going back to what Sarah said, and that is when the masses, they observe these 5 countries imploding, to stay away from it.
Exactly.
This is exactly the thinking in Morocco, in Algeria, in the UAE, in Saudi Arabia. Actually, to reflect my naivety, let me tell you what I thought. When Mohammed Bouazizi burned himself in Tunis, igniting that revolution, I thought the next country definitely is going to be Algeria. They have a track record of revolution, they have young people, they have corruption, they have the military, they have everything ready for a revolution. When I asked my friend Dr. Abdul Wahab, I said, so you guys are next? He said, absolutely not. I said, why? He said, look at our history. We had 10 years of killing and mayhem and terrorism. We don't want anything. Even if we have worse corruption and worse tyranny than currently, we will accept it. So this second wave that everybody is waiting for, I'm not sure whether it's coming or not. But let me go back to Soraya. Please comment about what the figure I cited, and that is 22% of the Egyptians, they don't read and write. How do you build modern society and modern economy on the back of ignorance?
المشكلة مش في ال 22% بس اللي مش عارفين يقروا، المشكلة أكبر من كده، المشكلة في اللي عارفين يقروا ومش عارفين يفكوا الخط عدل، مش عارفين يفهموا. إحنا عندنا مشكلة تعليم كبيرة جدا في مصر. بس أنا عايزة أرجع حتى أقول أنا متفق مع حضرتك في الرأي فيما يخص الربيع العربي. أنا هتكلم عن مصر تحديدا. في مصر الثورة فشلت بس اللي حصل إيه؟ تغيير a transformation in Egyptian society. طاقة كبيرة جدا طلعت. يعني وقت لما الناس نزلت التحرير الشباب كان جواهم رغبة ان يعملوا حاجة. شباب عمرها ما نزل ينتخب، عمرها ما عملت اي حاجة. اول لما الثورة خلصت كل الشباب نزل الميدان نظف الميدان. كان في طاقة مش بس حركات زي تحرير بودي جارد، لا حركات زي تحرير سبلايز. بقى المصريين ينزلوا يعلموا غيرهم. بقى في انا لو اقول لحضرتك كم المبادرات اللي حصلت من ساعة الثورة، مبادرات اجتماعية. فالفشل ده اتحول إلى طاقة. الشباب دلوقتي مركز
دي المرحلة الأولى لبداية الديمقراطية. بمعنى الآن في كثير من الدول العربية التي صار فيها هذا التحول صار في نوع من الليبرالية ولكن ليس بالضرورة ديمقراطية. يعني إذا أخذنا مثال للعالم العربي في درجة عالية من الحرية، لبنان يكون على رأس الدفتر، ولكن لا تستطيعي أن تقولي لبنان دولة ديمقراطية، بمعنى ليس فيها حكم القانون، ليس فيها المراقبة، ليس فيها العقاب، ليس فيها فصل السلطات، ليس فيها أشياء كثيرة. هذا ما يحصل في العالم العربي. مثلا تونس الآن نستطيع أن نقول هي صارت على بداية الديمقراطية وليس بالضرورة الديمقراطية اللي نحن نحلم بها مثل بريطانيا ولا أمريكا ولا الدول الاسكندنافية.
احنا حصل عندنا في مصر صحوة، لاحظنا ان احنا قصرنا استثمرنا في الدفاع بس والاعلام بس ما استثمرناش كفايه في التعليم. لاحظنا ان كلنا بندفع ثمن ان التعليم عندنا مش كويس، كل واحد فينا مصري عنده شركه، احنا كمجتمع بندفع الثمن ده. فاللي حصل عندنا انه بقى في طاقه الشباب اللي نزل يعمل حلول ومش مستني الحكومه.
أستاذ جناحي، قبل شوية قلت لا نستطيع أن نعلق كل مشاكلنا على إسرائيل، لكن هل يمكن أن ننكر أن جزء كبير أو لنقل جزء لا بأس به من مشاكلنا هو بسبب إسرائيل؟
طبعا احنا يمكن غسان and myself and you we remember this. شوف الشماعة is always there. القضية يعني in the 50s it was a nationalism. In the 60s and the 70s, it was Shamma'a was Palestine and the issue with Israel. That's where the rulers carried on playing what they were doing by using those things.
لا صوت يعلو فوق صوت المعركة مع جمال عبد الناصر.
بعدين we started with مع الخميني, started the issue of sectarianism, and we've just been carrying on from one thing to the other. So Shamma'a is always there. I'm not saying Israel is not at fault. Of course Israel is a big time fault. They are an occupier. And I don't want to go into نعمل دعاية هنا because I'm working on something which Ricard is fully aware of, but I don't want to mention it here, which is very much Palestinian, really creating critical thinking with the Palestinian youth starting with the bottom up. So that's a very important thing that we have to work with our people. When I think here, احنا لما نتكلم عن الإسلام السياسي, we're kidding ourselves or what? Because at the end of the day, most of the rulers in the Arab world, الشرعية comes from where? The legitimacy of these rulers comes from where? يسموا بولي الأمر. I'm sorry, ولي الأمر, I didn't see it in sort of في الديمقراطية ولا في الدكتاتورية or anywhere كلمة ولي الأمر. It's coming from الدين. So they are using the religion to basically being, they are ولي ربنا from top على الأرض على البلد اللي فيه. And this is, so brings me back to this business of the double traditions. You know, we are very happy to hit on one side, but we keep quiet on the other side. I think as long as we do that, as you said, as long as we do that, we're not going to get anywhere. So I think we need to start looking actually forward. And looking forward, there are problems ahead of us, which are, and I don't know how people just totally forget this problem, because there's a problem in front of you which says the youth in the Arab world today, they represent basically over 70% of the population. The unemployment in the Arab world within the youth is the largest anywhere in the world, and it's just going to carry on going higher. The corruption factor, a lot of people talk about corruption. I think corruption is something that you can root out, but corruption alone is not the issue. It's the people who are there. I always say putting the wrong people in the right places creates a problem, because the right people then are thrown out and they are lost out. So we're having a big problem. It's people issue.
Right.
It's nothing to do with elements, just corruption. Corruption is created because you're bringing the wrong people in the right place.
Sarah, Khaled is referring, I don't know whether obliquely or subconsciously, to the second wave. And that is, given the fact that more than 50% of the Arabs are below 35, more unemployment currently is hovering between 35 to 45, the prospect for progress in the Arab world is dimming. If you read the World Bank and the IMF, it's stipulating that they need to create 5 million jobs every year for the next 20 years in order just to stem the unemployment. So there is a second wave is coming, despite the fact that we say, nope, what we have seen is more than enough. Because when you don't have anything to lose, when it's all or nothing, I rather throw my lot, and even if I don't get anything, that's what's going to happen.
I mean, I've seen the same statistics that you've referred to, that, you know, more than 60% of our populations are under the age of 25, and we have, you know, at 21% the highest unemployment rates in the world. But I think it's silah dhu haddain. On the one hand, the fact that we have more than 60% of the population under that, you know, age means that we have a massive opportunity for societal renewal, that all these problems that we've been speaking about that are so entrenched, we have the opportunity to solve them in these young people if we can kind of really focus on our efforts on an educational nahda, which we haven't seen yet. But on the other hand, if we aren't able to tackle this other issue, which is making those young people, economically relevant when they get out of their schools. Like, we have a lot of university graduates right now who can't find a job, and it's because they're completely irrelevant in terms of their skill sets for the modern economy. So what could have been enough, the oil of the 21st century, which is our youth, becomes a very combustible and explosive resource, as you see now with terror that's running rampant in the region. So it really goes both ways. Unless we can start with quelling the problem at its essence in these schools, then we're going to continue to see what you spoke to, an explosive region with the issue of unemployment and also the issue of unemployability, where even the people who are graduating they can't really be productive contributors to society.
That brings me to the story that I always love and always like to cite, and that is the story of Singapore. When Lee Kuan Yew went to England and studied at Cambridge, and he came back, his country was mosquito infested. It was one of the poorest countries in the world. The people, they didn't have anything to eat. It was basically just a port for the Royal Navy to stop by. And he put his finger on something which we all have identified since then and even before, and that is education is the key. Education gives you the wings to fly and move into higher planes. He came back to Singapore and through hard effort identified that education should be the cornerstone. More importantly, he said, the teacher is the primary force that is going to move this country. And he established several high institutions for teaching the teachers to teach in the school. In 1980, Singapore was still very poor. By 1990, it jumped into a second league. Now, per capita is one of the highest in the country, in the world, and Singapore universities are the best in the world. They have the financing industry, they have the educational industry, and they have the high tech. Is such a program, is such an ideal situation repeatable, duplicable here in the Arab world, Mr. Saab?
Well, Singapore is a city. You may want to compare it to Dubai. You cannot compare it to the 200-300 million population of the Arab world. But this is what I wanted to go to, technology and education and higher education. We have done a very, very poor job in the Arab world in creating knowledge. We use knowledge that has been created by other civilizations. There was a time when we were very prosperous, and that was when we created knowledge 1,000 years ago. Today, everything we know, everything in our books has been developed by other civilizations, whether it's medicine, whether it's technology of automobiles, whether it's, we do okay in literature some places. Actually, the only Nobel Prize that an Arab has won, in the Arab world has won in a long time is in literature, although Ahmed Zuhair in the US environment won a Nobel Prize. So the lack of creation of knowledge is something that our universities need to look at and try to address.
Is Dubai repeatable?
Why not? Dubai is repeatable. Dubai has probably better rule of law than many places in the Arab world, and that has allowed the prosperity in Dubai.
They just started the smart city. They are integrating technologies that is not integrated anywhere, and that is the blockchain. They have just moved it into Dubai. Do you have a comment?
No, I just agree about Dubai because I live now in Dubai, and I think it's, again, going back, that Dubai principle is about religion and politics should be completely separated from business and improving education and improving the growth of the city.
Is this going to be Armageddon for the Arab world, for the Muslim world, and that is to separate religion from politics? Sarah.
I think, as they've watched what's really taken over the region in terms of terror that has completely destroyed their society, they recognize that, yes, education is expensive, but ignorance is doubly expensive. And so a lot of these, Vision 2030 that they're putting in place, whereas education was previously, treated as a cultural or tangential issue, it's really coming to the center and to the core of a lot of these plans for the future. So I do think, As we look to the future, this notion of our governments being hard to reshape, in fact, I think as an existential matter, there's a necessity to change. Because as you look at the oil crisis, for example, today, with oil prices tanking, you have to rely on a new resource to push you forward. And you're going to need innovation to drive that, creativity to drive that, and where does that come beyond our youth? So I think it's as a matter of necessity that they're going to have to reorient themselves.
Khaled.
Let me just come to, you said three things, and I think it's good to hear it from the youth. Definitely the youth, I mean, we have a fantastic opportunity. I mean, I live in Europe. The society is getting older and older, okay? So we need the youth. In our part of the world, the Arab world, we have youth, but we don't have the opportunities, how to develop and how to utilize this youth going forward. Eventually, it's going to come back to what I said at the beginning. But I think it's important not to forget what's going on today. You just mentioned it, okay, because oil price is going down. Remember, certain dynasties have been basically surviving for the past 70 years based on two things. One has been that oil coming out, okay? And two has been basically looking after each other in different places. As much as they hate each other, and we see it these days coming up, but of course now since June, it's the first time that it's become much more public and it's coming out. They've been living off these two things as surviving as dynasties and sitting back there. Actually, even in Dubai. I mean, Dubai is a fascinating place, but the question is sustainability of Dubai in long term. Because it is Madinat al-Ashbah, because the changes in the rest of the world with taxation and everything else, eventually that's going to have a negative effect on Dubai sooner than later. But I would like to say one very important thing here, and you mentioned that, is the change is coming whether we want it or not. It is going to happen through a Rabi' Arabi, Rabi' whatever, I don't care, but change is going to happen. Today, there are three regional powers in the Middle East. One is Israel, and unfortunately the other two are not Arabs, Turkey and Iran. We are out of this thing altogether. We would have loved, Egypt used to be at one stage, and Egypt basically has gone out of that. So, I mean, just remember Egypt, and with 100 million people. What happened? There was no electricity, there were petrol shortages and everything else during the Brotherhood when they were ruling. Suddenly, in July 1st, all the lights were there, everything else was there. So Dalaa Al Mufti was there. So the issue, the factor of Islamic, sort of Islam siyasi or Ghair Islam siyasi, I think it's a red herring in what is going on fi Hayat al-Shu'ub that we have. So people will come in, but now this important thing to remember, because I'm looking at the future. نحن دول ريعية. We are rentier economies. The rentier economy is the end. So now to come to the other resources, unfortunately, there is no taxation without representation. It's happening in the Gulf. I mean, forget everywhere else. It's happening in the Gulf. They're cutting off the subsidies. They're taking off everything else. The rulers, the cronies, they're still living as they were before, traveling first class, doing whatever, whilst the people, the middle class, is going basically down the drain because their purchasing power is going. Eventually, this is going to basically backfire. What we don't want, coming back to King Abdullah II in 2011, what he mentioned, we want an evolution. Now, the evolution, I think the people, especially the young, they should push for that evolution fast now. We cannot wait for this evolution to happen through a revolution, because a revolution, we've seen what's going to happen. Next time is going to be much, much more blood than what we've seen in the past.
Next time is going to be bloodier for many reasons. One of them is that the fear that somehow oil will become a commodity that nobody wants is coming. 2 years ago, the German scientists, they invited Angela Merkel to come to a fusion reactor that Germany is building for the past 10 years. It cost about $12 billion. They asked her to inject the hydrogen into the fusion system. She has a PhD in physics. Upon the ceremony, after they had champagne, she asked them, said, so you've been building for the past 10 years. When is this going to be operational? The chief scientist told her, within 10 years, ma'am, we will have limitless energy that we can export to the rest of the world. And the same thing the Americans are doing. A fusion reactor in America is way ahead even of the Germans. So I can envision a situation, say, in about 20 years from now, it's going to be a lot more expensive to dump the oil than to extract it out. Then what we're gonna do? Countries that they live on oil, they're gonna find it extremely difficult. Now I open the floor for questions, and معلش, the lady here.
مرحبا، أنا اسمي عروب صبح، أنا صحفية، كاتبة صحفية، وأيضا ناشطة في حقوق المرأة والإنسان والطفل في الأردن. عندي تعليقات من فضلك وعندي سؤال، والسؤال للجميع لمن يحب أن يجاوب. أجد نفسي دائما بجانب الشعوب، وأعتقد أن إفساد الشعوب وتجهيلها ودفعها نحو تعليم وتلقين ما يريده النظام وجعلها جماعات من المطبلين هي مسؤولية سنوات عديدة من حكومات غير وطنية غير منتخبة وفاسدة. موضوع الإسلام السياسي أعتقد دخل حيز الإسلاموفوبيا عندنا وجلد للذات مبالغ فيه، خصوصا أن كل الديمقراطيات في العالم بما فيها الولايات المتحدة هناك أحزاب دينية تشارك بشكل أو بآخر في الحكم. أيضا عندما نتحدث عن فصل الدين وعن الدولة ونتحدث عن دول كرمز للتقدم، لا نتكلم عن حقوق الإنسان وننسى الحاكم المطلق أيضا خوفا على طبعا مكتسبات معينة. تدخل الإسلام السياسي صديقتي دلع برأيي أنا، تدخل الإسلام السياسي ليس هو ما أفسد الربيع العربي بشكل مباشر. أعتقد أن الجميع تابع مقابلة وزير الخارجية القطري قبل فترة وجيزة وحديثه عن الصيدة وهربت الصيدة وكيف ما هربت. فهناك دول تدخلت في خراب دول أخرى ويجب أن نعترف بذلك، بناء طبعا على تفاهمات مع المجتمع الدولي ومع إسرائيل. السؤال: ما هو دور البرجوازية العربية الفكرية والاقتصادية المقربة من الحكم في إبقاء الوضع على ما هو عليه؟ وشكرا.
دلع since she targets you.
يعني أنا السؤال شوية صعب علي، بس
ما معناه إذا فهمت السؤال أنا، يعني هناك في طبقة الوسطى، طبقة رجال الأعمال،
التي
طبقة رجال المصارف، طبقة السيفل سوسايتي اللي يهمهم جدا أنه وضعهم يبقى كما هو من خلال مساعدة الحاكم بشكل أو بآخر بالبقاء في الحكم، وليس أن تأتي الجماهير أو كما ينظر إليها الرعاع هم اللي بيستلموا الحكم.
أعتقد أن المسؤولية الأكبر تقع على هذه الطبقة، لكن كيف تتنور هذه الطبقة وتتصرف هي ترجع لها، لأنه الطبقة الوسطى هي بتكون الطبقة العليا، هي بتكون السند الأول للطبقات الحاكمة وهي ظهرها لتحميها. إذا وقفت ضدها فبيضعفوا الحكام. يعني نحن مجتمعنا مجمل المجتمعات العربية تعيش في دول أبوية، الحاكم فيها مؤله مقدس، لا أحد بيقدر يسأله سؤال أو ينتقده أي انتقاد، والكل ماشي الحيط بالحيط ويا رب السترة، ما بده يعرض حاله لأي مساءلة قانونية. وشفنا ناس نحن كيف تختفي وكيف تعتقل وكيف تسجن. فهل الإنسان مستعد أن يضحي بنفسه من أجل قضية وطنية ربما تصح وربما لا؟ لا أدري، هو يعتمد على الإنسان نفسه. يعني يمكن أقيس الأمر على حالي بموضوع كتير بسيط. يعني أنا إنسانة عايشة براحة والحمد لله كل شيء تمام. أنا ممكن جدا إني أنا أقعد وأرفع رجلي وأقول أنا شو دخلني بالمواضيع، خليني مرتاحة، أشرب قهوة هون، سافر، أقعد ساوي. بس أنا بدخل المعترك وبنوجع وبنقرص كتير على أمل إني أعمل تغيير ولو بسيط جدا. مو كل الناس مستعدة تتحمل الوجع ومو مستعدة تضحي بممتلكاتها ومميزاتها.
بما أنه حكيتي على الوجع، حكينا عن الإسلام السياسي. الإسلام السياسي عندما تواجد في بعض الدول العربية، أحيانا في الغالبية من الدول العربية، حكيتي عن الوجع. انظري إلى المصطلح الإسلام السياسي، إسلام السياسي. في داخل هذه المجتمعات كانت هناك سجون، وكان هناك تعذيب، وكان هناك اغتصاب، وكان هناك نفي خلف الشمس، وما زال المصطلح هو الإسلام السياسي. فلا أحد يخوفنا ويرهبنا بالإسلام، لأن احنا كلنا مسلمين وعارفين ما لك وما عليك. خالد.
بس just one comment. احنا مشكلتنا انه we are still always trying to find someone to blame.
Exactly.
Leaders, elite society, Israel, whatever. I think if every individual person looks at himself, his circle, his family, and start working on this, investing in his family, in his children, in the closest circle, regardless whose fault it is, we can build something. As long as we're sitting in the chair and the thing is Islam السياسي أو الزعيم أو we're not moving forward.
Nothing is going to happen.
سأتحدث عن تجربتي الشخصية لأوجز بعض ما تحدثتم عنه. وأنا عمري 14-15 سنة كنت في مظاهرات في طرابلس ليبيا لأصرخ المزيد من الركوع لأسيادك الأمريكان يا ملك إدريس، رغم أن أسرتي وجدي وأهلي كانوا مع الملكية وكانت عندنا أكبر قاعدة عسكرية. طيب بعدها جاءت ثورة الفاتح العظيم، صفقنا وتظاهرنا وحلمنا بالعهد الجديد. لم تمضي سنة أو سنتين إلا واكتشفنا النكبة الكبرى والكذبة الكبرى والجريمة الكبرى. اضطرينا أن نهاجر. كنا طبعا في بعثة في أمريكا. في 1980 طبعا بدأنا المعارضة، كونا التنظيم المعارض ضد القذافي، هددت أسرنا. 1980 جاء إرهابي أمريكي أجره القذافي ليقتلنا، ضرب زوجي ب3 رصاصات. هذا باش نجي نقول لكم نلوموا نفسنا، نلوموهم هم، احنا هم، قصة طويلة. جاء ليقتلنا في أمريكا، في الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية، وكانت هناك محكمة ويعني فساد قضائي في أمريكا عشته شخصيا. طيب أثناء هذه الفترة 40 سنة من المعارضة لم أرجع إلى ليبيا. رجعت إلى ليبيا بعد الثورة. 40 سنة من المعارضة وأنا وغيري ندق الأمم المتحدة، منظمات حقوق الإنسان إلى آخره. اسمحوا لي، الغرب ساهم في إبقاء الدكتاتوريات 40 سنة. من كان يحمي القذافي وصدام حسين ومبارك وإلى آخره. لا نستطيع أن نقول إحنا من شنق شبابنا ونساؤنا، من عذب، من هجر، من يعني لا يمكن أن نختزل أو نلغي النضال السياسي العربي لمئات المناضلين العرب إن نلوم نفسنا. بعدين صرت بالغلط سفيرة في الاتحاد الأوروبي لليبيا. طبعا ما نفعتش أن أكون سفيرة، يعني اشترطت على من كان يريد أن أذهب، قلت لهم شوفوا مانيش ديكور حضاري، أنتوا الآن أنا لو بنمشي بقول اللي بنقوله. واكتشفت وانا اعرف الاتحاد الاوروبي لما كنت معارضه نجيهم ما حد يبي يشوفني، ما حد يبي يقابلنا. من باع السلاح، من سرق النفط، من خلق الفساد، من ركعوا له يعني زواج المال والغرب وزواج الدين والسياسه، دي عارفينها. جربنا ما نفعتش. مشروع نهضوي عربي، تقارير الامم المتحده اللي انا شاركت فيها، تنبأنا بما سياتي، كنا نعلم ما سيأتي، ولكن من يسمع 7 تقارير ريما خلف الله يذكرها بالخير موجودة في الأردن، يا ريتها معانا. كنا نرى الانفجار قادم، ولكن كنا نحاول أن نتواصل مع السياسيين رغم فسادهم. ما فيش من يسمع. لمن يسمعوا؟ لتوماس فريدمان، للغربيين، الأمم المتحدة اللي أنا معاهم 40 سنة 45 سنة، خبرائهم ياخذوا بالملايين وبالالاف، ينقلوا ريبورت على ريبورت، اجتماع على اجتماع، مؤتمر على مؤتمر. فبالتالي لا اعتقد ايضا هذا كوم. واشتغلت مع الامير طلال بن عبد العزيز في صندوق تنموي عربي خليجي، محاوله ان ما نقدروا خلاص جربنا، هدو قويين كبار كتار، نشتغل للشباب، نشتغل للتنميه، نشتغل للفقر، نشتغل للتعليم، نشتغل للمراه، نشتغل لبناء الجسور. وصلت أنا الآن عمري 70 سنة، أنا وصلت إلى قناعة قاطعة. شوفوا أقول لكم، التغيير هوليستيك، من فوق ومن جنب ومن تحت ومن هنا ومن هنا. فأنا أعتقد مراجعة المفكرين العرب والنخبة العربية وألومها وخاصة الليبية. ما عندناش اليوم اللي أنا متضخمة، وبعدين قضية المرأة والرجل والشباب وملايين عم تعطي الشباب. إحنا في ليبيا 8 سنوات ملايين صرفت تمكين المرأة، حي على المرأة، حي على المرأة، رايحة في خبر كان الشباب كارثة. فإذا تجار على الربيع العربي. وأنا أرجع وأقول 7 سنوات لا شيء، ما بدينا. أنا حموت مش حشوف شيء، مش حوقف، والله لو يصير ما يصير مش حخاف. أنا الآن من جديد يعني تركت ليبيا، بس الآن راجعة برجع، يصير اللي بيصير، يقتلوا يسجنوا اللي بيصير. لأن أنا أعتقد الحيرة اللي أنا بقولها لكم، اللي قلتها للإعلاميات، عندنا هالعقول وعندنا هالرعب وعندنا هالخوف وعندنا هالإدراك، وشرحنا وشلحنا، وكل يوم وأنا معزومة في مؤتمر في العالم، حتى في الغرب، حتى في أوروبا. أنا من 3 أسابيع كنت في البرلمان الأوروبي، في ضياع، نظام عالمي كله ضايع، والجميع في العالم يكرهوا شيء اسمه السياسيين، حتى في أمريكا وحتى في أوروبا. سامحوني تكلمت كثير.
هي ثريا ترد. ثريا تريد ترد عليكي.
مش هقدر ارد طبعا، صعب الواحد يرد. بس انا استمتعت بالمشاركه بتاعتها جدا. انا عايزه اسال بس سؤال، ليه احنا النهارده كعرب لسه مش عارفين نجتمع ونتحد؟ يعني احلى حاجه امبارح عجبتني فعلا ان من غير سياسه، من غير اي حاجه، كلنا كنا بنسقف لمرشحين بعض، كلنا كنا حاجه واحده، كلنا كنا فخورين ببعض وبهويتنا المشتركه. احنا للاسف وصل بينا ان احنا بقينا متفرقين جدا، لدرجه ان احنا حتى ما قدرناش ان احنا نفكر في الصالح العام لينا كلنا، ان احنا يبقى عندنا مرشح لمنصب دولي يكسب زي الامير علي او رئيس اليونسكو. ان احنا ما اتحدناش ان احنا نتاكد ان حد مننا يوصل. فده سؤالي للحضور وللبانلست، ليه مش قادرين نتعلم؟
اوكي تفضل.
عندي سؤالين. أول شيء البانل الحديث كان فاكتس، كل واحد عم بيعطي فاكتس أو رأيه بأمور محددة، بس إذا عملية التغيير اللي نحن كلنا موافقين عليها بدها تبلش كيف؟ أول الشغلة الأولى the first step، الخطوة الأولى نحو التغيير المضبوط. بريد أعرف جواب كل واحد منكم شو هو لازم يكون. شغلة واحدة،
تعليم.
What is the first step? Number two. هل نحن موافقين كلنا انه الانتليجنسيا بكل المجتمعات هي بداية التغيير؟ واذا نحن بنعتبر انه التكريم هي مكان عم تلتقي فيها الانتليجنسيا بمختلف مجالاتها، هل ممكن يصير في نيوكليوس معين تعتقدوا يبلشوا، هل تتجمع ينعمل one project، ينعمل خطوة بمشروع واحد يكون بانراب يقدر يتبلش فيه بمحل معين، او نحن بعدنا بطور المنتل اكسشينج بوينت اوف فيوز مش ممكن نكون عمليين بمحل انه نقدر نتفق على مشروع ونقدر ننطلق فيه ونكبره من محل لمحل؟ شكرا.
سؤال رائع وممتاز، خلينا نسمع الإجابات السريعة.
Both of you touched on really important points, and what we require is really global change, not change just here or there in these small little places. And the most important way that we can affect that really is a solution that touches on the broadest base of society. And the one way that I can really envision that is when you go and start with young people across the board in public schools and private schools, not just with the elite, because we all had the opportunity, let's say, to go to private schools, but at the end of the day, we're the ones who end up in companies and we become almost distanced from the rest of society. We really need a broad-based solution. That's part of it. The other part...
Before you continue, that solution has been volunteered continuously for the past 30, 40 years. As soon as you have an educated masses, educated youth, things will change. But that somehow is not true. In 1979, the UNESCO declared Iraq and Iraqi education system the highest in the Arab world, and illiteracy was 0. Look at Iraq now. Look at the people in the parliament. They just instituted a law allowing men to marry girls as young as 12. Continue.
But Iraq was also subject to war and subject to poverty during that war, which made people very susceptible to this extremist thought. So the other piece of the equation is we have a very rich Arab diaspora across the world who are excelling in their fields. And I think if there's a way to really take that, immense power and find a way to kind of bring it back to the region or to be ambassadors of change in the region as opposed to just operating in a vacuum, that really pushes the equation forward. Because what ended up happening is we've pushed a lot of our diversity out. And so fundamentally, we need to recreate this environment that, you talk about American exceptionalism. What America was so exceptional at was being able to attract people from around the world, irrespective of their creed, their caste, their religion, and harness that diversity to create more solutions rather than more problems. In the Arab world, we treat diversity as a source of our problems. Muslim, Sunni, Shi'i, Masihi, whatever. We say, لأنه عندنا التعددية عندنا مشاكل. بس بالعكس التعددية هي وسيلة ل more and more solutions. So if that diversity can come back and work with us to really, if that diaspora can come back and work with us to prove this concept, which they've managed to prove quite well abroad, then we start to push forward.
Mr. Saab, we still don't have that magic bullet. We have societies in the Arab world where education is available, resources is available, and the will is there, and yet nothing happens. There is something wrong with us.
I agree wholeheartedly, and I apologize in advance if I offend anybody, but we are in a very perilous situation in the Arab world. I will give you a story I heard from James Woolsey. He used to be the director of the CIA in the United States. He told me that himself when I met him once in my life. He was having a conversation with the Saudi oil minister. And this was like 20 years ago. He was explaining to him that the United States at the time was developing automobiles that could go 250 miles to the gallon, or 300. And the Saudi oil minister says, "Are you trying to destroy us?" He said, "No, we're trying to put you to work." And where are the think tanks in the Arab world today that are studying the scenarios of the very near future, 15, 20 years, just like you said, when oil becomes worthless, when energy becomes available through carbons, through other clean sources? Oil has been the source of the wealth of the entire Arab world. And when that stops being as pricey as it is today, we are looking at disaster. And my answer is, we don't believe in think tanks in this country. The West is built on think tanks. They study the future, they study and they lay out scenarios. They don't know the future. They say, if this happens, this is what we need to do. If this happens, we don't do that. We need to start doing that.
Mr. Saab,
yes.
When earlier I asked you what is the reason behind this American phenomenon, you said we have a document called the Constitution.
Yes.
That's true. Khedive Ismail, when he wanted to have a constitutional monarchy, he scanned the horizon and he found the Belgium Constitution is the best in the world. He adopted it, just cut and paste. Nothing happened. Khaled Janahi mentioned the love of the chair, and I have a story here to tell. When the War of Independence in the United States ended, they looked around and they had a conference and they elected George Washington to become the president. His first term is 4 years, second term another 4 years. They said, first initially, as a matter of fact, they wanted him to be a king. He said, absolutely not. When his second term came, they said, would you like a third one? He said, no, absolutely not. He gave it up. It has become a tradition. Every president can run only for 2 terms, except during the Second World War, they said we make exception for Roosevelt. He stayed a 3rd term. People like Washington make the change. It's not the paper. We have lots of papers written. The Arab constitutions, if you look at them, they are the most advanced in the world. And nothing, the people who implement that constitution drags you back.
May I?
Please.
It starts by saying, know by all these presidents that all men are created equal, today men and women. What constitution in the Arab world advocates equality between all the people?
They do.
And in practice.
Let me take another question here. Rawan.
Thank you. My name is Mona Makram Abed. I'm Egyptian, as you can tell. I want to say a few comments on what happened. First of all, my friend Farida Alagi, you were asking before if there is a one woman who could encompass everything we're saying. I think it is her. She could be the icon of the revolutionary woman, if not the bionic woman. That's one. Second, for the diaspora, somebody said about the diaspora to come. For the diaspora to come, you must create credibility. Yeah. You must create a friendly environment where people respect the law, and people do not respect the law in our countries. Third thing about democracy in the Arab world. We should not look at democracy through the prism of American system. We are in a process. Democracy is a work in progress. That's how we have to look at it. And that is why I am very much for the revolution. I am not at all against the revolution. I think it's the first wake up of the Arab world. I don't think it has failed. It has been derailed.
But are we in the wilderness? Are we in the Sinai for 40 years spinning around ourselves now?
No, we're going to spin back now. So what I'm telling you now, it is that the revolution in Egypt, at least, has brought out the best in the Egyptians. Solidarity, conviviality, lack of sexual harassment, solidarity between the different religions, etc. I think this will come back, but it will come back through the youth, not through the rulers. Second thing about what you said about Singapore. I agree Singapore, but you should look at Vietnam today. Vietnam, the students today can compete with American and British students in education and be above them. I want to remind the audience that in 1960, Vietnam was raised to the earth. Second, third, whatever. Now, about the religion, I think President Sisi has put his finger on what we need, which is reforming the religious discourse. However, what I don't agree with him is it's not the Azhar who's going to reform the religious discourse. It is the civil society. It is the civilians in this country who are be able. That's why my message here is you must empower civil society. Civil society has saved Lebanon during the 15 years of war. Civil society today is on the side of women's rights in Tunisia. Thank you.
Okay.
May I?
Please pass the mic to Rawan, but meanwhile, since you mentioned Vietnam, let me ask you, Janahi. Vietnam is it's not a democratic country. When they won the unification war back in 1975, they marched themselves on a reconstruction. They managed it, and now they are one of the rising power in Southeast Asia.
You see, I've been very careful not to mention that word democracy. I think it's a red herring to talk about democracy and with the immediate thing that we want in the Arab world. I think let's come back. كلامك ما شاء الله يعني I must admit I love her, but I love you today a bit more than her. And she doesn't mind. She doesn't mind. She doesn't mind. Sure. Yeah. And the point about the UNDP report in 2002. Okay. It came out. I would specifically talk about the gender gap. And Condi Rice came and did whatever she did. Suddenly, the response, للأسف الشديد, from what you call a nukhba, and they went with it, is that the first lady in all the Arab countries became the most intelligent, the best person, the most beautiful woman in that country. I'm sorry, that is not nukhba, that is very much tabbala. So I would say actually the Arab world problem has been that the nukhba تختفي والطبالة ترتقي. That's been our major problem from that perspective. But I think the change to come. See, we cannot, احنا دائما بنقول للأولاد لما بيقولون الشيطان ضحك عليه. We always have a reason to have the الشيطان. بما أن الشيطان is America and Europe and United Nations, we know they're going to kill us. Why the hell do we go with them? Why don't we do what's right for us? I think the element of always blaming I have no problems in blaming everybody in the world. But if I don't actually really start work and work hard, the youth is the issue. I'm too old. I'm too old to do that. So the youth, I have to encourage the youth, because what I'm worried about is not me. I lived a beautiful life. I've had a fantastic time. I've been through it all. Nasser ya Hurriya, Habib al-Umma al-Arabi. We've been through all that. We've been through petrol being at whatever, and we've enjoyed that. I've had fantastic education. AUB alumni, whatever alumni.
Khaled?
Yeah, but I'm just giving you this because the youth, we're forgetting the youth. I'm worried about my grandchildren. I'm not worried about my kids. I'm worried about my grandchildren, because the future, unfortunately, is in their hands. And if you do not start from that point, and it's not a question of starting that point and accepting these rulers, because if you accept the rulers and you want to do that, they don't work. And that's why we're going to be back to square one. So you have to get that out, and it's not revolution. You love revolution, but it's a revolution of the mindset before the revolution of the blood.
Let me take a question from Rowan, then I get back to Mr. Saab.
روان الضامن صانعة أفلام مستشارة إعلامية. أنا سعيدة أن المنصة هي تعطينا الأمل رغم جلد الذات الواضح منذ بداية البانل اليوم. يعني عندنا من البحرين ومصر ولبنان والكويت والأردن والإمارات وفلسطين وسوريا والعراق على منصة واحدة. هذا يعطي أمل حقيقي أنه يمكن أن نعمل سويا. سؤالي للأستاذ صعب، هل التشبيك لنقفز هذه المرحلة لن نستطيع الانتظار للاستثمار في التعليم، أو فعلا أن تأخذ القيادات السياسية بالمساواة أمام القانون؟ هل يمكن أن نعمل القفزة من خلال التشبيك والعمل بين العرب في داخل الوطن العربي والعرب في الخارج وبيننا كدول عربية؟ لأنه لدى بعض هذه الدول أشياء إيجابية لو عملنا معا عوضا عن عملنا الفردي كأفراد أو كمجموعات صغيرة. وشكرا.
قبل أن يجاوب عليك الدكتور صعب، ذكرتيني بموضوع. In 1947 India gained independence from Britain. In 1947 India was one of the poorest countries in the world, one of the most diverse countries in the world. Almost 350 million, about 50 million of them there was Muslims. Now they're just at the threshold of 1 billion something, and yet the country is progressing. But more importantly, 99% of the Indians were poor, uneducated, and they don't know anything about anything. They had less than 1% elite. Gandhi and Mahatma and Jawaharlal Nehru, you know, they pushed the country forward. So is education, like we say, education, Singapore and all this, apparently it's not the prerequisite for development, progress, and stability. Please go ahead.
I think it's one essential component for development. Without education, we cannot get anywhere. But in its own right, it's not enough. You have to have the political system that allows for the free enterprise, for the creativity of the human being and the human spirit that we lack in a lot of places. But allow me to go back to Vietnam. During the last century, there were two competing powerhouses, the free enterprise capital society of the West and communism. Communism lost because of corruption of the system. It was not about giving the masses what they proclaimed they wanted. It was about enriching the party and the party operatives. Today, the two competing powers are both capitalistic free enterprise. One is democratic, the West, and one is authoritarian, which is China. China is rising very, very fast. I think Vietnam would come under the same fold where you have free enterprise and you have education, but you do have an authoritarian system. And the jury is still out on which system is going to succeed to become the preeminent system on this globe. And we need to choose. We're neither. We don't have any of the prerequisites.
We'll take a final question from the lady here at the back, and then we wrap it up.
Are you talking about America?
No, I'm talking about us. Yeah.
سيما من البحرين. طبعا أنا أول شيء أهم شيء أهني ريكاردو السنة لأن اكتشفنا أن كل سنة يخطونا one step, 2 step higher. We've never had this chance of having this conference. It's been always sort of press conferences and that's it finished. فيعني هذا قاعد يخلينا ثاني يوم مستمرين وهذه إضافة جدا جدا رائعة صح حقيقة، وأتمنى أنه يستمر، وأنا متأكدة السنة الجاية راح يجيب لنا بعد شيء جديد. سؤالي هي احنا ركزنا دائما على الشباب والشباب، انا اعتقد عندنا من الكفاءات العربيه اكيد ما في شك انه لازم يكون مستمر، لكن اعتقد ان عندنا من الكفاءات العربيه الرائعه وحتى اللي موجوده حاليا سواء كانوا شباب او كبار. انا في 2007 يعني احاول اكون جدا في ثانيه اقول الكلمه هذه، في 2007 حضرت مؤتمر عالمي او ورشه عمل حقيقه لمده 4 أيام، ما كان في ولا واحد عربي اللي هو في الحدود الدوليه. في بريطانيا كانوا 40 شخص من CIA موجودين، كنا 20 اودينس فقط، الوحيده عربيه. في نهايه اخر 5 دقائق في المؤتمر خلوا خارطه الوطن العربي والحدود الدوليه مالتها مختلفه. واحد دنماركي من ورانا، طبعا اخر 10 دقائق خلاص احنا مخلصين المؤتمر وبنطلع، واحد دنماركي قام قال what's the F word you American to do with the Arab world boundaries. بكل CIA كلهم موجودين 40 شخص واكثرهم من بحكم تخصصي في الخرائط الدوليه كلهم من CIA من الخرائط. قال we are as a third party we advise they can take it or leave it. So what I want to here realize is not only we keep blaming ونجلد نفسنا ونقول احنا لازم نكون احنا لازم نكون. انا اعتقد yes we have to do this, but yet we have to think also about the other part, what's the strategy we have to work on to face these challenges, these facts that's happening. اعتقد هنا الدكتورة ركزت على التحديات اللي هي واجهتها which it's fact. So we have to look also at the other parties strategies to face that ونوعي شبابنا. حاليا شبابنا اكثرهم في المدارس الخاصه يتعلمون يروحون يتخرجون يدرسون يشتغلون في الدول الاجنبيه، لكن these things is not clear until you really come to stage that you come to a glass ceiling for this.
Indulge me and summarize this by a question.
I think we need strategies. When I go for such conferences and things which happen, the strategies that we need to face as the Arab part of the world to work on that. Either by level of
both of you are students of the United States. I'll take two quick answers, then go ahead.
So I remember in my Arabic classes in the Middle East, a lot of the texts that we used to read, the theme of the text was الوقوف على الأطلال. You have this character who's standing on top of a mountain and looking at the ruin, the vast expanse of ruin of their society. ويبكي الماضي. And I find that a lot of the discussion that we have in meetings and whatnot is looking at all the problems of our past, and it's a nostalgia, it's a national nostalgia. I think as young people, the more I go to conferences and forums that are being spearheaded by young people, there is a real desire to move away from kana wa kunna to sanakun. And I know this might sound very idealistic to a crowd of very well-seasoned people, but I do think that, with technology, there's been a convergence of our aspirations as young people, with young people around the world. And we do have the tools, despite the difficulties, to kind of elevate ourselves, to empower ourselves, to work toward that. But what I think is very important too is we talk about civic society, which surely plays an important role. We talk about education. And I just want to make a point. We can't conflate building schools with education. That's two different things. But I think we also need leadership that pushes that. You see that in some pockets, like you see it in Dubai to a certain extent. You have the Arab Youth Center right now, which is trying to adopt these talents and push them forward. And I hope that these governments kind of speak to governments in the region and say, look, youth are not a threat. On the contrary, they can represent they can present a force for your governments to really elevate themselves. Because if you don't harness them, that's when they become threatening. Whereas when you have a house in a neighborhood, it's not likely for you to want to blow up that neighborhood. And I think if youth are made stakeholders in the system, it's less likely that they'll try to agitate and they'll try to work with the existing government or whatnot to push forward evolution rather than revolution.
The lady's question is, what is the solution? Reminds me of the title book of Lenin. He has a book called What is the Solution? ما الحل? And after so many pages he came is marshalling the sources of the people, of the masses. Go ahead.
I think just going to the question of what to change and what to start and the third party, I don't blame Israel or Turkey or Iran to interfere in our region. Everybody's looking for their interest. And I think we are quite bad.
Well, that part, you will find hundreds of people disagreeing with you.
Let me finish. And we are quite bad in seeking our interests as a nation and Arabs individually and as a countries. I think if we understand that what's gathering us and connecting us as different countries is hundreds and hundreds of things, and what's separating us could be 2 or 3 things, and we ignore what's collecting us and gathering us, and we keep focusing and picking and poking the things that are separating us. Nothing is connecting the German with the French, with the Italian, with the Swedish. You know, they don't share the same language, they don't share the same culture, but they've understood that if we need to look about our interest and put it the first in our agenda, that's how we can move forward. And I think this is the same thing we need to be looking at, our interests as a nation together to move forward, and looking at the diversity as thing that is actually flourishing us and actually kind of empowering us rather than something distracting us.
Dalaa, you want to comment something?
يعني أنا اللي بدي أحكي بطول فما
طيب.
خايفة.
طيب, I'm going to wrap it up with the last 3 panelists. The implication was here that contrary to what the West say, you know, they have the hand in the till. You know, they are behind the revolution, they are behind the toppling of the regimes, they are behind the instability, which I venture to add, that is just not true. If you take examples and if you predicate it on the assumption that the most important thing for Western society is trade, is prosperity, is stability. It is in their vital interest for countries to grow so they can sell them product and they can import from them. Whenever you have a revolution, that trade disappears. In 1958, the military in Iraq toppled the monarch, toppled the regime. It wasn't the British, it wasn't the Americans, it wasn't the French. In 1952, the military toppled the king. It wasn't the British, it wasn't the Americans. So this notion that the West is behind all the regimes toppling up, when you subject it to scientific facts, to theory, I mean to evidence, you won't find any evidence to it. So Saab.
Well, I'm not about to vindicate Western foreign policy. Actually, I have read evidence to the contrary. Maybe the '58 revolution was not Western made, but very recently there was published an article by Joseph Kennedy, none other, about American meddling in Syria and all the coups d'etats that happened between the mid-40s and the early 50s in Syria. And it seems that every one of them, the United States had a hand in them. I'm now convicting my own country, which I shouldn't be doing, but I disagree that there has not been foreign meddling, but I also go back to Switzerland was too strong for Hitler when he was at the peak of his power because of cohesion and because of respect of law and because they know where they're going. Unfortunately, we do not have that, so we allow the meddling by the foreigners to succeed.
The underscored word I used deliberately, all.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
I think I'll just reiterate what I said before, the importance of education and cohesion. Is there foreign interference? Yes, there is. Will there always be? Probably. I don't think it's going to go away. I mean, we're in a region that was also artificially designed. Let's remember that a lot of the borders here were designed in the last century by, you know, the UK and France. I think that I would love to see a revolution in mindsets, as you said, where we focus on moving forward and countering this with supporting entrepreneurship and education. Thank you.
The last word for you, Khaled Janahi.
Well, they are not happy with hitting back, so let me just go forward with visions. I would put it like, you put it in a different way, but I will say it like this. We have Vision 2030s, we have Vision 2025s, we have Vision 2040s now. But unfortunately, there is no point to put visions if you are not visionary. Mackenzie's of this world can put a book for you. BCGs of this world can put books for you and tell you what's supposed to be, and then strategize that vision, which is written in a book, how to go forward. Vision comes from an individual and individuals. They have to bring that in. So reform means, we talk a lot about reform. Since 2001, since September 11, reform has been the word which has been going around. I've yet to see a reformist in the Arab world, a true reformist, because a reformist means he reforms himself before he asks everybody else to reform. And I don't see anyone, that's why I call them rulers, not leaders. You're right about education. and creating the youth and the space. But I tell you one thing, I see that because I've been working on this for the past 15 years. The youth, what happens, they go one way or the other. They are part of a tabbala, or they are the unknowns, they are thrown out. And matter of fact, the thrown outs are much better than the tabbalas. So we need to be very careful. I think, Nabila, the issue of talking about the civil society, I would add a capital letter, bold, a word before that. That's an independent civil society. We do not have in the Arab world today a true independent civil society, which would create think tanks. You talk about think tanks, you need an independent civil society. We don't have that. So all the think tanks that we have in the Arab world, even the ones outside, they are part of the palaces or the presidential palaces. They've been paid to. Because the independent ones, either they are shut their mouths, or they don't basically sit on the side. Because al-maslaha, everybody's worried, khali dhahri ma'al hayt, rather than being broken, so I just woke up. And that is the problem. So the problem is, it's not just one, the problem is everywhere, and I come back. It starts from the bottom. But education is important, but it's not the word education. Everybody talks about education. We spend, Saudi Arabia, since 2001, because of what happened, and they hit them, the Americans hit them, the Condé, whatever, Rumsfeld, they hit them with the issue of the education, change your curriculums. They've spent substantial amount of money on that. But I tell you, that's not education. Education is here. Education is not what ma taqra. Education is how you do things rather than what you read. So that is, pardon?
I thought you might be the last one, but apparently there is a request for Dalaa to say something so we can wrap it up. Okay. Regardless.
Fine. It goes from الدليع إلى الدلع.
أنا كثير بيهمني موضوع الجيل الجديد، الشباب العربي، سارة وزملائها، وخوفي عليهم من التحديات اللي بيعيشوها بمجتمعاتنا. في تحديات كبيرة على الشباب العربي، بدهم يثبتوا نفسهم، بدهم يحاولوا انهم يطلعوا عن السلطة الأبوية الحكام والمجتمعات العربية اللي دائما في أب، وذر بالبيت أو بالمجتمع أو بالسياسة في واحد بده يحكمهم. بالإضافة إلى تحديات الدين والسلطة اللي هن لازم يطلعوا منها، انهم يفصلوا الدين عن حكمهم بمجتمعهم، ويحاولوا انه يتعايشوا ويتقبلوا الاخر. نحن عندنا رفض الاخر، واحدة من اكبر المصائب بمجتمعاتنا العربية، تكفير الاخر، كرهه، رفضه وعزله، انه هذا بيختلف عنا، خلص ما بدنا اياه. وهي اكبر مصيبه، وهي اللي عم تعملنا الحركات الارهابيه بالوطن العربي. بالاضافه انه الجيل العربي الجديد، بالاضافه لكل التحديات اللي عايشها بمجتمعه، بده يطلع لبرا ويحاول انه يثبت للعالم انه هو مو ارهابي، انه هو مجرد انسان عادي، ممكن يكون مهندس، مدرس، اي شيء، ومو ارهابي، بينما كل العالم صاروا يطلعوا عليه انه هو ارهابي. فالجيل الجديد عنده تحديات كبيره كثير، وانا فعلا خايفه عليه.
شكرا جزيلا دلع. Well, I venture to say that such a panel was convened 30 years ago, 40 years ago. It's going to be next year, the year after. My only fear that it's going to be 100 years from now, we will be doing the same panel and standing where we are. At the end, I would like to thank the panelists for their views. Would like to thank the big boss says end it with an optimistic, but you know, I belong to the school of realism and taught me, you know, to temper my hopes and my thoughts. Thank you very much for everything. Thank you, Ricardo Karam. Thank you, Takreem. And inshallah, we'll see you next year.